I still remember the night everything cracked open like it had been waiting all along, simmering beneath the surface. It was November 14th, 2021, a Sunday night, and the house was filled with that lazy, post-weekend silence. The kind of silence you only notice when you're alone with your thoughts. I was sitting on the couch, a half-finished bottle of Sam Adams sweating on the coffee table. Football highlights murmuring low from the TV. My wife, Emily, was upstairs in our bedroom, working on lesson plans for her high school English classes. As she often told me, it sounds cliché when I say it now, but the truth is, I'd had this gut feeling for weeks, maybe even months, that something wasn't quite right. It wasn't just the way she kept her phone closer than usual, like it had suddenly turned into a second limb, or how her laughter had changed. It used to be belly deep, unguarded, infectious. Now, it was quieter, softer, almost secretive, as if she was saving the real version of it for someone else. We had been married 8 years by then, together for almost 12. We met back in 2009 at a mutual friend's barbecue in Columbus, Ohio. I was fresh out of college, working my first corporate job in IT support. Still carrying the kind of arrogance you have in your 20s when you think you've got it all figured out. She was finishing grad school, quoting poetry lines and rolling her eyes at football talk, yet somehow making me feel like I was the only guy in the backyard worth listening to. I fell for her, quick her wit, her stubbornness. The way she could recite entire passages of Shakespeare like she was on stage. Our life together had never been flashy, but it was ours. We bought a modest 2-story house in Dublin, a suburb just north of Columbus. 2 bedrooms, a finished basement that I turned into my little cave, a backyard big enough for cookouts. We used to talk about kids but kept putting it off, always waiting for the right time, which of course never really exists. Looking back now, I see the signs more clearly. Emily had this friend, Mark. He was a fellow teacher at her school, though in the math department. I met him once or twice at school functions. He struck me as that overly friendly guy who leaned too far into casual jokes. Balding early, always in a plaid shirt. It's the kind of guy you wouldn't think twice about if your wife said, "Oh, he's just a friend." And she did say that. She swore by it. Anytime his name came up, it was always with that dismissive tone, like I was being ridiculous for even asking. "He's just a friend. Stop being paranoid." Those were her exact words. Repeated enough times that I started to feel ashamed for even having the thought. Paranoid, crazy, distrusting. But paranoia has a way of digging its claws in, especially when small things start to add up. The late nights grading papers. The sudden gym membership, though she'd never been much for working out. The new perfume I hadn't seen her buy. Something floral and sharp that lingered even after she said she was just running errands. That Sunday night, I wasn't planning on anything. Honestly, I'd been trying to convince myself to stop obsessing, to just trust her again like I used to. But I needed the laptop. Mine had been acting up, and I remembered hers was charging in the bedroom. I walked upstairs, trying not to overthink, telling myself I just needed to download a software update for work. The room was dim except for the glow of the screen. She must have stepped out to shower because her phone wasn't on the nightstand, which was unusual. I sat on the bed, opened the laptop, and the password screen greeted me. For a second, I froze. I knew her password, of course. We'd always shared that stuff freely, or at least, we used to. My hands hesitated above the keys. I told myself I was just going to use the browser, just get what I needed. But the truth? Deep down, I knew I was looking for something. When the desktop loaded, I saw the usual clutter lesson plan documents, half-finished PowerPoint slides, folders of student essays. I clicked on the browser. But something caught my eye. A folder tucked away in the corner of the desktop, labeled simply Vacation. That word punched me in the gut. We hadn't taken a real vacation in over 2 years, not since before the pandemic. In 2019, we'd gone to Florida, spent a week at Clearwater Beach, drinking cocktails with umbrellas, and pretending we weren't worried about money. Since then, nothing but day trips. No plane tickets, no hotel stays. Certainly no vacations. My heart was pounding as I double-clicked the folder. At first it looked innocent, stock images from years past. A few of us in Florida, even older shots from Chicago when we did a weekend there in 2016. I almost closed it, relief creeping in, but then I noticed a subfolder inside, one without a name. Just a string of random letters and numbers, like IMG_4823. It looked like something automatically generated. I clicked. The screen filled with thumbnails, dozens of them. Sunlit beaches, restaurants, hotel balconies. And there she was, Emily, in sunglasses I didn't recognize, wearing dresses I'd never seen, standing beside someone else. Him, Mark, the two of them, grinning, arms around each other, drinks in hand. Her face lit up in ways I hadn't seen in years, if I'm being brutally honest. The blood roared in my ears. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped the laptop. It was like my brain couldn't fully process what I was seeing, like maybe I'd misinterpreted. Maybe these were old pictures. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. But the timestamp was right there in the corner, July 2021, just 4 months ago. While I thought she was visiting her sister in Michigan, while I stayed home, mowing the lawn, reheating frozen pizzas, waiting for her to come back. The worst part wasn't even the pictures themselves. It was the way she looked in them, carefree, alive, radiant in a way she hadn't been with me in years. Like she had saved the best of herself for him while I got the scraps. I closed the folder, my chest heaving, the room spinning around me. For a long time, I just sat there on the bed, staring at the blank screen. My whole body felt numb, like the air had been sucked out of me. In that moment, my marriage, my life as I knew it, collapsed. I hadn't said a word yet, hadn't confronted her, hadn't even fully let the rage or grief sink in. But something in me broke that night, quietly and irrevocably, and even though I didn't know it yet. That discovery, the folder, the photos, the truth, I could no longer deny, was just the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I don't even think I blinked for more than a few seconds at a time. I just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling while Emily shifted in bed beside me, completely unaware that her little secret folder had ripped my world in half. Every time she let out a soft sigh in her sleep, every time she turned over and brushed against me, it felt like a dagger twisting in my gut. I kept replaying those photos in my head, frame by frame, like they were branded into my eyelids. Her smile, his arm around her waist, the cocktails clinking in their hands, stupid hotel balcony with the ocean in the background. My mind wouldn't stop screaming at me. How many lies did she tell? How many times did she look me in the eye and pretend everything was fine? By morning, I felt hollowed out, numb, but also buzzing with this toxic cocktail of rage and disbelief. I got out of bed earlier than usual, made coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink, and just sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone, pretending to check work emails. When she came downstairs in her robe, yawning and tying her hair up, she kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong. That simple gesture, her lips brushing against my skin, made me want to scream. I almost confronted her right there, but something in me hesitated. Maybe it was fear. Maybe I wanted to be absolutely sure before I set fire to everything. So I waited. The next few days were torture. I kept watching her, listening to her, testing every word she said against the knowledge burning in the back of my mind. On Tuesday, she told me she had a late grading session at school. She came home around 8:30, carrying a bag of Chipotle like it was some kind of peace offering. I smiled, took the burrito bowl, and chewed on it, while wondering if she'd spent those extra hours laughing with him in some empty classroom. By Thursday, I couldn't take it anymore. I had gone back into the folder twice more, staring at the pictures until I felt sick, and I noticed there were even videos. Little clips of them on the beach, splashing each other in the water, her voice high and playful in a way it hadn't been with me in years. One video stopped me cold. She turned the camera on herself, smiling, then leaned in and kissed him. Full on the lips. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. That was it. The breaking point. The line I couldn't uncross. On Friday night, I told her I had ordered takeout and asked her to wait in the living room while I grabbed it. But instead of food, I brought her laptop. I set it down on the coffee table, opened the folder, clicked on the first picture. She froze. I didn't even need to say anything. The blood drained from her face instantly, and she went pale, like she'd seen a ghost. Her hands trembled, her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out at first. When she finally managed words, they were weak and frantic, like someone trying to put out a fire with a glass of water. She stammered, telling me it wasn't what it looked like, that I was overreacting, that they were just friends, colleagues, that it was innocent. Innocent. That word still makes my skin crawl. I sat there in silence for a long time, just letting her twist in her own lies. She rambled about how she had gone on a trip to clear her head, how she needed a break, how she didn't tell me because she didn't want me to misunderstand. Misunderstand. As if the pictures of her wrapped around another man, kissing him on a balcony, were open to interpretation. When I finally spoke, my voice came out low, shaking like it was dragging itself up from the pit of my stomach. I asked her, point blank, how long it had been going on. At first, she swore it was just that one trip. It's just a moment of weakness. But the longer I stared at her, the more her story unraveled. Her voice cracked, her eyes welled up, and eventually the truth spilled out like poison. It hadn't been one trip. It hadn't been one moment. It had been months. Lunch breaks at school, grading nights, weekends when she said she was visiting her sister. She confessed to sneaking away, to lying straight to my face, to building an entire second life with this man while I sat at home believing we were fine. Something inside me snapped then. I didn't yell. I didn't throw things. I didn't even cry. I just went cold. Ice cold. I told her to pack a bag and leave. She begged. She pleaded. She grabbed my arm and tried to make me look at her, but I couldn't even see her anymore. She wasn't Emily, my wife, my partner of 12 years. She was a stranger who had burned everything we had down to Ashdod. She ended up staying at her sister's house that night, which felt fitting. I sat alone in the living room until sunrise. The glow of the laptop screen still burned into my vision, and that was when it truly hit me. The marriage was dead. The life I thought I had, the future I thought we were building it, was all a lie. But the worst part? That was just the beginning of the fallout. The days after Emily left felt like living in someone else's skin. Everything around me looked familiar, the walls of our house, the framed photos, the faint smell of her perfume that clung to the couch pillows, but nothing felt like mine anymore. It was like I was squatting in a stranger's life, waiting for the real owner to come back and kick me out. The first morning alone, I woke up at 5 a.m. without meaning to. The bed was cold beside me, the sheets pulled tight where she used to sleep. For years, her presence had been the rhythm of my mornings, the sound of her blow-dryer in the bathroom, the smell of coffee drifting upstairs, the faint clatter of her travel mug as she left for work. Now, it was just silence. Thick, suffocating silence. I wandered downstairs and made coffee. I didn't drink. My stomach twisted with every sip, like even the smallest act of routine had turned poisonous. I sat at the kitchen table scrolling through news articles without reading a word. My phone buzzed a few times, texts from coworkers about some IT outage. A message from my mom asking if we were still coming for Thanksgiving, but I couldn't bring myself to reply. When Emily finally texted that afternoon, it was this long, rambling apology that felt rehearsed. She said she was sorry for hurting me, that she had made a terrible mistake, that she never stopped loving me. She begged me to let her explain. She swore she'd cut things off with Mark, that she'd do anything to fix us. I stared at the screen for a long time, my thumbs hovering over the keyboard, but I couldn't type anything back. Not because I didn't have words, God knows. I had too many, but because I didn't trust myself not to say something I couldn't take back. Over the next week, I went into autopilot. Work, home, sleep, repeat. I showed up to the office, sat through meetings, fixed people's login issues, but my mind was never really there. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photos again. Like a slideshow of betrayal playing on loop in my head. Nights were the worst. I'd pour myself 2-3 whiskeys just to feel numb enough to lay down, but sleep never came easy. When it did, it was full of dreams where I confronted them both, shouting until my throat bled, or worse dreams where she chose him over me without hesitation. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon. The ripple effect spread fast. My mom called one evening, her voice full of warmth, asking how Emily was doing, if we'd booked our flights for Christmas yet. I froze. How do you tell your parents your marriage has imploded? That the woman they welcomed into the family like a daughter has been sneaking around with someone else for months? I lied. I told her we were still figuring things out, that we'd let her know soon. She didn't press, but I knew she could hear something in my voice. Friends noticed too. My buddy Ryan, who I'd known since college, invited me out for beers one Friday night. Normally I'd jump at the chance, but I made some excuse about being tired from work. The truth was, I couldn't stand the idea of sitting across from him, pretending to be okay while he talked about his wife and kids. His life looked like everything I thought mine was supposed to be. Meanwhile, Emily kept trying. She sent me long emails about how we could go to therapy, about how she was willing to rebuild trust, about how she regretted everything. She even dropped off a letter at the house one afternoon, handwritten in that looping script I used to find so beautiful. I couldn't bring myself to read more than the first page. The sight of her words, her desperate attempts to rewrite the narrative, made me sick. But here's the thing. As much as I wanted to cut her off completely, part of me couldn't. Not yet. 12 years of history doesn't disappear overnight. There were moments when I caught myself remembering the early days. The nights we stayed up late watching The Office, laughing until our stomachs hurt. The trip to Chicago where we got caught in the rain and ducked into a tiny Italian restaurant. Ordering pasta like we were in some romantic movie. The way she used to reach for my hand without thinking, and then I'd snap back to reality. I was reminded that those memories were poison now. Every good moment felt counterfeit. Like a counterfeit bill that passed in my hand until I realized it was fake all along. My mental health spiraled fast. I stopped going to the gym. Meals turned into whatever I could microwave. I started taking long drives at night, circling the empty streets of Dublin with music blasting, trying to drown out the noise in my head. Sometimes I ended up parked outside her sister's house without even realizing I'd driven there, staring at the warm glow of the windows, knowing she was inside, living a parallel life without me. One night I nearly texted her, "Come home. Let's talk." My finger hovered over the send button for what felt like an eternity. But then I thought about those videos again, about the way she kissed him, without hesitation, like she'd been waiting for that moment all along. My chest tightened, and I deleted the draft. The fallout wasn't just emotionally, was physical too. My boss pulled me into his office after I missed a deadline on a project I normally would have crushed. He asked if everything was okay. I lied again, said I was just burned out, promised to get back on track. But I could see the doubt in his eyes. And then there was Thanksgiving. I couldn't avoid it forever. My family gathered at my parents' place. The smell of turkey and pumpkin pie filling the air, the football game humming in the background. Everyone asked where Emily was, and I finally broke. I told them the whole story. The photos, the lies, the affair. My mom cried. My dad shook his head in disbelief. My younger sister muttered something about how she always had a bad feeling about Emily, saying, "It out loud should have felt like release." But instead it was like ripping open a wound that hadn't even started to heal. That night, driving home from my parents, I realized I was standing at a crossroads. I could let this betrayal destroy me, or I could find a way to claw my way back. But at that moment, I wasn't ready for either. I was just stuck in the wreckage, surrounded by the pieces of a life I no longer recognized, and as much as I hated to admit it, I wasn't done with Emelina yet, because the fallout wasn't just about what she had done. It was about what I was going to do next. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke up with a strange clarity, the kind of clarity that doesn't feel comfortable, like a sharpened knife sliding under your ribs. For the first time in weeks, the fog of grief and disbelief had thinned. And I realized something. I couldn't stay buried under this betrayal forever. I had to act. Not just for revenge, but to reclaim myself, to stop being the passive spectator in my own life. I started small. I changed the locks. Every key, every code, every little backdoor she could use was gone. It wasn't just about security, It was symbolic. For the first time, I was taking control of the space she had violated, the sanctuary that had been ours. Walking through the house alone afterward, I could finally breathe. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, but I imagined it was fading. Just like her hold over my life, I decided to do something. I'd avoided for months, talked to someone who could help me make sense of it all. Therapy wasn't my first instinct. I've always hated being told what to feel, but I needed a sounding board, someone who wouldn't judge, someone who could help me unpack the anger, the grief, and the shame. Dr. Patel became that someone. She didn't coddle me or tell me to forgive and forget. Instead, she asked the right questions, the ones that forced me to face my own complicity, my denial, and the patterns I had ignored for far too long. Then came the emails. I found myself compulsively checking Emily's digital footprint, not out of obsession, but from a need for closure. Social media, school emails, mutual friends updates. Every post, every photo, every tagged location became a piece of a puzzle I needed to understand. And what I discovered stunned me. Mark had posted a few vacation selfies, innocuous at first glance. Sunset over the ocean. Cocktails by the pool, but the captions, the comments, the timing, they all lined up with the photos on Emily's laptop. I had proof, undeniable proof, not just that she had lied, but that she had orchestrated an entire parallel life without me. I debated what to do with it. Part of me wanted to confront him directly, to yell, to humiliate. Part of me wanted to use it as ammunition to hurt her in return. But another quieter voice reminded me that my goal wasn't to drag everyone down. It was to lift myself up, to take back the dignity she had stolen. So I began documenting everything. Dates, screenshots, cross-referencing messages. It was meticulous, almost obsessive, but it gave me a sense of control. For the first time since discovering the photos, I felt powerful, not in a vengeful way, but in a self-preserving way. I realized I didn't need to yell, I didn't need to plead, I didn't need to confront her with my anger to reclaim my life. I just needed the truth in my hands and the resolve in my chest. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into projects with a ferocity I hadn't had in years. Every ticket I closed, every problem I solved felt like a tiny act of reclaiming agency. My coworkers noticed the change, and while they didn't know the specifics, I could see the respect returning, the nods, the way people started asking for my opinion again. It was validation that I wasn't broken beyond repair. And then the confrontation with Emily happened, but on my terms. I had scheduled a meeting with her at a neutral location, a small cafe we used to frequent before life became this tangled mess of lies. I showed up early, notebook in hand, organized.com. When she walked in, I saw her hesitate, unsure, like she was stepping into a lion's den she had no power over. I laid it out, each photo, each message, each detail. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't even cry. I just spoke slowly, deliberately, letting her see that the veil had been lifted and that there was no hiding behind excuses anymore. And for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, not fear of being exposed, fear of losing control, of realizing that the life she had built on deception was crumbling. She tried to justify, to explain, to plead. But it was like listening to someone describe a world I no longer inhabited. The empathy I had once felt for her was gone, replaced with something sharper, colder, more protective of myself. I realized then that healing didn't mean forgiving her. Healing meant acknowledging the truth, accepting the pain, and deciding not to let it define me anymore. I started reclaiming parts of my life that I'd neglected. I reconnected with old friends, the ones I had drifted away from over the years. I started running again in the mornings, feeling my lungs fill with cold winter air in Columbus. Smelling the faint aroma of autumn leaves, mixed with car exhaust and coffee from nearby cafes. I joined a local photography club, capturing sunsets, city streets, fleeting moments, anything that reminded me that the world was still beautiful. Even if my personal life had been turned inside out, and yes, there were moments of temptation. The urge to embarrass her online, to send Mark a message and let him know how much pain he caused. To post the photos and watch everything burn. but I didn't. Every time I felt that itch, I reminded myself that my power didn't come from revenge. It came from self-respect, from rising above the chaos instead of sinking into it. Months passed. Emily moved out permanently, officially filing for divorce in early February 2022. The paperwork was clinical, sterile, a stark contrast to the emotional hurricane that had raged for months. I signed the papers with a sense of finality, a quiet acknowledgement that the life I thought I had was gone, and that the only thing I could control now was what came next. And with that, I started to truly turn the tables. Not on her, not on Mark, but on the narrative I had been trapped in. I began to rebuild myself piece by piece, focusing on what mattered: my mental health, my friendships, my career, and eventually my own happiness. The betrayal had broken me in some ways, yes, but it had also forged a new version of myself, sharper, wiser, and more unwilling than ever to settle for half-truths or empty promises. By spring 2022, I could finally walk past the cafe we used to go to without flinching. I could scroll past old vacation photos without my chest tightening. I had reclaimed the narrative of my life. And for the first time since discovering that folder, I felt like I had agency again. But the story wasn't over. Because even as I healed, even as I took control, the ghosts of betrayal lingered, reminding me that some wounds leave scars that never fully fade. And that, maybe, is the part that truly teaches you who you are, how you rise, how you fight, and how you decide not to let someone else's lies define your entire existence. By summer 2022, life felt different. Not perfect, never perfect, but different in the way that matters. The house, once a cage of memories, had been rearranged. I painted the walls, bought new furniture, let sunlight flood rooms that had been shadowed by doubt and secrecy for too long. I even planted flowers along the front porch, something Emily never liked, something I had wanted for years. Every small choice reminded me that this life was mine to shape. I learned to sleep again, deep and uninterrupted. Some nights, I'd lie in bed listening to the soft hum of the city outside, the faint honk of a car, the distant laughter from neighbors' yards, and I'd feel a strange kind of peace. The ghosts of Emily and Mark didn't vanish, they lingered, but they had less power over me now. Instead of anger, I felt a hard-earned calm, a sense of certainty that I could survive even the deepest betrayals. I even started dating again, cautiously at first. Coffee dates, walks in the park, conversations that didn't carry the weight of a dozen years of lies. Some of them were awkward. Some of them were disappointing. But with each encounter, I realized I could trust again. Not blindly, but with eyes wide open, tempered by experience. And I began to see that trust wasn't a weakness, it was a choice. A powerful act of courage after everything I had endured. Work thrived. Projects that once felt tedious became outlets for creativity. I was promoted by the fall of 2022, recognized not just for technical skill, but for resilience, for the way I carried myself after months of personal chaos. People admired it, though none of them knew the depth of the storm I'd weathered, and that was fine. I didn't need validation from anyone else. I had my own. There were moments when I still thought about Emily. Sometimes I'd see her name pop up on Facebook, tagged in pictures with friends we once knew together. Sometimes I caught glimpses of her life through mutual connections, happy, smiling, perhaps even in love again. I didn't feel the burning rage anymore. I didn't feel the crushing heartbreak. Instead, I felt a strange gratitude, not for what she had done, not for the lies, but for what surviving it had taught me. I remember one evening in October 2022, sitting on the porch with a cup of tea as the leaves turned to deep crimson, a neighbor's kid ran past, laughing, a little dog barking behind her. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and wet earth, and for the first time in years, I felt like myself. Whole, scars and all. I realized then that betrayal is not always about the other person, it's about how it shapes you, forces you to confront your own limits, your own worth, your own ability to rise. I didn't seek revenge, didn't try to ruin her life or Mark's. The truth was enough. The photos, the timeline, the knowledge that I had been lied to, they were all evidence of what had been. and all I needed was to know it, to feel it, to accept it, and then let it go. That release was power in itself, sharper than any public humiliation I could have orchestrated. By the end of 2022, I had rebuilt routines, friendships, and even a tentative sense of future love. I traveled again solo trips, hiking in the Smoky Mountains, exploring Chicago on weekends, taking photographs of cityscapes at sunset. Every new experience was a small reclamation, proof that I could create joy even after betrayal. And then came the moment that finally closed the loop. Emily reached out casually, almost as if nothing had happened. A simple message. "Hey, hope you're doing okay." My finger hovered over the reply button, the old rage flickering for an instant. But I didn't respond. Not because I hated her anymore, but because I had nothing left to say. The chapter was closed. The wound had scarred, yes, but the bleeding was done. I realized then that resolution doesn't always mean closure from the other person. Sometimes it comes from within, from reclaiming yourself, from proving that your life doesn't end when someone betrays you. You take the broken pieces and you build something new, stronger, and more beautiful than it was before. It hasn't been easy. Every now and then a memory sneaks in, a trace of pain that flares up like a match in the dark. But I've learned to sit with it, to acknowledge it, and then let it pass. That's the difference between surviving and thriving. Looking back now, I can see the journey in its entirety. The shock, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the obsessive nights, the rage, the emptiness. The reconstruction it was all part of forging a version of me that no lie could ever touch again. Emily taught me something I never wanted to learn the hard way. Some people aren't meant to stay. Some promises aren't meant to be kept, and some love, no matter how deep, can't be salvaged when trust is broken. But I also learned something else, that life is never truly lost. Even when it feels like it's been ripped from your hands, you rebuild. You find new light in the cracks. You learn to love yourself in ways you never thought possible. And eventually, the pain doesn't define you anymore. You do, as I sit here now in the golden light of a late summer afternoon. Watching the city hum in the distance, I feel that truth deep in my chest. Betrayal can break you, but it can also teach you who you are and what you're capable of. And for that, as bitter as it was, I am quietly grateful. Because the life I have now is messy and imperfect and entirely mine, is stronger than anything I ever had before. And I will never let anyone take that from me again.